This is the new MacBook Air M3. It's the 13-inch, this is the 15, and this is the MacBook Pro, also with the M3. And I want to figure out whether you should go for the Air or the Pro. Because Apple have just refreshed the 13 and the 15-inch Airs for 2024 with the new M3 chip, which is the same 3nm Apple silicon used in the base model 14-inch Pro. We also now get Wi-Fi 6E and now the ability to output to 2 external monitors, albeit with the laptop lid closed, so technically still only 2 screens. Altogether then a fairly modest upgrade, I'm sure you'll agree. And of course the M2's had a price cut down to $999, replacing the old M1 Air as the entry-level MacBook, with the 13-inch M3 starting at $1099. But then we have the MacBook Pro. This is the 14-inch, also with the M3 chip, the base model MacBook Pro, and this replaces the older 13-inch Pro that had the touch bar. And while the Pro also has a bigger brother in the form of a 16-inch model, and you can also spec it with an M3 Pro and M3 Max chips, so this can get ludicrously expensive. But in this video, I'm comparing the M3 Air and the M3 Pro. So hopefully, by the end, you have a better idea which one's right for you. So let's kick off with the price. M3 Air base model, £1,099, £1,699, or $1,599 actually. It's $100 cheaper, but that doesn't include sales tax in the US. So there is some price variation around the world, obviously. So let's talk specs. And as I say, they all use the M3 chip, although as I'll show you in a minute, the Pro can be a fair bit quicker. The Pro also gets 512 gigs of storage as standard, double the Air's 256, and also a 10-core GPU as standard versus 8 on the Air. Although you can pay $100 more or just upgrade the RAM, which automatically gets you the extra graphics cores. Fine. What is frustrating though, particularly with the Pro laptop, is that these all come with 8GB of RAM as standard, 8GB of memory, which is the same amount as we got with the M1 Air from 4 years ago. For the Pro especially, I think it's a bit unforgivable that it still comes with 8GB. And I would absolutely pay the $200 extra to get 16GB of RAM regardless of which one of these you go for. Because you can't upgrade it yourself, so probably budget an extra $200 regardless of which one you go for. I know, I hate it too. So realistically, the MacBook Air has 2 main advantages over the Pro. It's cheaper and it's more compact. We have lost the tapered edge of the outgoing M1 Air, and it does now share a very similar design with the Pro, notch and all. And while it's not a like for like because the Airs are 13 and 15-inch and the Pros are 14 and 16, the Air is a good deal thinner and lighter. To give you an idea, this 15-inch Air is actually 40 grams lighter than this 14-inch Pro. And it's about 4mm thinner. Does it make a big difference carrying it around, putting it in a backpack and opening it on a train or in a coffee shop? I'd argue no, not really. Although I do quite like the starlight and midnight color options we get with the Airs, it is a shame that the Pros just come in plain old silver or space gray, unless you go for a higher spec and unlock the midnight option. More importantly though, as I get confused which laptop is which and move these around my desk, is the MacBook Air is a fanless design. There are no fans in this, so no matter what you're doing, it runs completely silent. So I definitely appreciate the Air's form factor, but in my mind, the chunkier Pro makes up for it in other ways. Firstly, it does have fans. When you are gaming, rendering, designing, 3D editing, whatever more demanding thing it is you're doing, then they whir up and help keep the chip cool, which means you get less throttling and better sustained performance, and we'll come back to that in a second. The Pro also squeezes in more ports. Both laptops get 2 USB-C Thunderbolt 4s, a MagSafe charger, and a headphone jack, but the Pro also gets a full-size SD card reader and an HDMI 2.1. So photographers and videographers, like myself, definitely appreciate having that. And if your monitor, like that one there I'm reviewing right now, it's the new LG 32-inch 4K OLED gaming monitor, very, very nice, but it doesn't have a USB-C port, I can then at least use the HDMI. Of course, both the Airs and the Pro get the same fantastic touchpad and keyboard. We have the Touch ID power button, no differences there. But we do have to talk about the speakers, because both 14 and 16-inch Pros pack in 6 high-fidelity speakers with force-cancelling woofers. And versus the Air, it's a much richer, more bassy, and just fuller sound. However, the 15-inch Air does actually get 6 speakers to the 13-inch's 4, and it does sound noticeably better.
I want them back. I want them back. I want them back.
So this is kind of a halfway house between them, but certainly the Pro does still sound noticeably better. For me though, the biggest difference between the Air and the Pro is the screen. MacBook Air, 60Hz, 500 nits, LCD. MacBook Pro, 120Hz, 1600 nits, mini LED. Okay, taking those things in turn. First, the higher refresh rate, or ProMotion as Apple like to call it, means everything on the Pro feels so much smoother, whether you're scrolling through websites, scrubbing through a project timeline, gaming. I wouldn't say it's a must-have feature, but most Windows laptops at this price point do offer 120Hz, and it makes the laptop just feel significantly faster. Second, the brightness, and I think this is a bigger deal. We get 500 nits on the Air, 600 on the Pro, so right out of the gate it's 20% brighter no matter what you're doing. However, if you're watching, gaming, or editing in HDR, say you're watching a show on Apple TV, then this can peak at 1600 nits. And the best bit is you can use an app like Vivid, which can unlock that HDR brightness across the whole desktop, whatever you're doing. Obviously this will impact your battery life, but I use this all the time if I'm outdoors or traveling, and often it means I can actually see the screen without having to squint and get a headache. It's a big plus. And third, this is using a mini LED backlight, compared to the Air's regular LCD screen, which means we get much better contrast, with proper inky blacks rather than washed out greys. Day to day, I'd argue it's not all that different, and unlike an OLED screen, you can sometimes see blooming, but if you're watching lots of movies, you're editing photos, then along with being much brighter and much faster, the Pro's screen, for me, is the biggest selling point. The Air isn't bad by any stretch, but I think compared to the Pro and more egregiously compared to similarly priced Windows competitors, the screen is falling behind a little bit. But let's move on and talk about performance. Is the Pro actually faster? Well, the answer is yes, but only sometimes. It depends on how you use it. Quick caveat though, because this M3 Air review sample that Apple sent me, it has 16 gigs of RAM and therefore the 10-core GPU. By default, it has 8 gigs of RAM and an 8-core GPU, whereas this is the base model MacBook Pro, which comes with a 10-core GPU, so that is the same, but only 8 gigs of RAM. So in theory, this will perform a little bit better than the base Air, so it's not quite an apples to oranges, if you will, but it's pretty close. And actually, to start with, in Geekbench 6, which only takes a couple of minutes to run, there's actually nothing really in it between them. And across the 3 tests, the Air I've got here comes out slightly on top, although the difference is pretty negligible, and as I say, it does have more RAM. Now in Cinebench, which is a more demanding 10-minute benchmark for the processor, while single core is again nigh on the same, the multi-core is a good 15% higher. And look at this, the M3 in the Air is running at 108 degrees Celsius versus 102, 103 on the Pro. I actually would have thought the Pro wouldn't even get that hot, but with the 4,000 or so RPM fan whirring away, it does allow the Pro to maintain higher clock speeds, giving us better performance. Now this is Blender, and I'm going to run this ripple animation for 10 minutes to see which one renders more frames. And thanks to the magic of editing, let's skip forward, and we're looking at 540 on the Air versus 624 on the Pro, 15% uptick. And finally, Old Faithful's Shadow of the Tomb Raider. I do realize no one's actually playing this, but it's one of the few games on Mac with a benchmark tool, and it's still pretty demanding. And running at 1200p, high settings, we're looking at 31 versus 38 FPS, which is a solid 22% boost for the Pro. So it all comes down to the Pro having a fan, and under sustained load, crucially sustained load, if you're gaming, you're video editing, you're rendering, 3D design, that sort of thing, then you are going to see a sort of 15-20% uptick in performance over the Air. But in everyday life, just, scrolling through websites, opening apps, and just using it normally, if you will, for a bit of Netflix and Google Docs, you're not really going to see a difference. However, having that extra performance on tap when it's needed, while also offering a longer battery life, that's a pretty good combination. Now, Apple say the MacBook Air M3s will get you 18 hours of local video playback and 22 hours on the MacBook Pro. So on paper, according to Apple, this will last about 10-15% longer. But we can't take Apple's word for it, so I thought I'd run a quick test. And by a quick test, I mean leaving it for 10 hours overnight playing a YouTube video to see where they end up. The 13-inch Air ended on 30%, the 15-inch Air had 36%, and the Pro had 39%. So good, better, best. Just like the speakers. Whichever one you go for though, definitely opt for the fast charger, which does come included if you go for the extra storage. So where does that leave us? Which one should you actually buy? Well, on the one hand, it is good that we have so many options. You've got the M2 Air starting at $999, and then you've got the new M3 Airs, and then you've got the 2 Pros, and you can play with all the different specs and go for M3 Pro and Max chips. Lots of different options. On the other hand, what I don't like is how they still come with 8 gigs of RAM, and Apple is still the master of the upsell. And to add 16 gigs of RAM and 512 storage, a spec you probably might want is an extra £400 if you go for an Air, or an extra $200 with this because you already have 512 storage. So that is a bit frustrating. But to answer the question of which one I would buy, well, assuming you're not doing anything crazy and you just want a good all-round laptop that doesn't break the bank, then I would probably get none of these. I'd probably get the M2 Air. Just the base model for $999 is £100 less than this. Yes, it doesn't have the slightly faster M3 chip, doesn't have Wi-Fi 6E, and you can only output to 1 monitor. And you know, £100 premium isn't that much to ask for, but it's starting to creep up. And I think what I would do is get an M2 Air, spec it with 16 gigs of RAM, and then maybe spend £50 on an external SSD so you've got more storage space as well. That'll do you for the next 5, 6, 7 years, to be honest. In terms of the MacBook Pro, well, it's in the name. This is a Pro device. Yes, the screen is lovely, the speakers are fantastic, and I do use a MacBook Pro 16 as I bang the desk, every single day of the week, and I absolutely love it. But it is so expensive, and I think unless your business, your company is buying it for you, or you're buying it yourself for work as a bit of an investment, starting at £1,700, you're going to want to double the RAM, which puts you up to $1,900, and really the best bit about the Pro is that you can spec it with an M3 Pro or M3 Max chip. So yeah, my conclusion is, annoyingly, it depends on what you're going to use it for, and also what your budget is. I'm going to stop waffling now. Hopefully that was helpful. If you've got any other questions about this, drop a comment below, and I'll do my best to get back to you. If you enjoyed the video, a like and a thumbs up, and a subscribe on all those annoying YouTuber cliches would be lovely, and I'll see you next time right here on the Tech Chat.